Hello and welcome to the Even if Faders book launch. Thank you for joining. We wanted to have a little bit of time set aside just to chat with people about the book, read a few passages from the book, and talk about why we wrote it, all that kind of good stuff. I'm Berneta Haynes, one of the co-authors of the book, here with my husband, Lornett Vestal. And just a couple of things so that you have a sense of what's coming next. We will start out by talking about the book and why we wrote it, and then we'll move right into a reading from the book, a very short reading, and finish off with a Q&A, answering some pre-submitted questions, as well as any questions that are dropped in the chat during this book launch. So again, thank you for joining, and let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna turn it over to Berneta.
Yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Lornett Vestal, husband of Berneta, and also co-author of Even the Faders. And I think this series, which is the Faders and Alpha, the first title, Even the Faders, I think why about this book, it's a really, really intriguing book. It's fun, it's exciting, tense. And what this tells the story of is a ordinary woman who has been hiding her extraordinary abilities for most of her life. And she's thrown into a whole new world of espionage and betrayal and adventure and trying to just want to get back to her regular life, but there's no going back for her. So that's a little bit about the book, and kind of why we wrote it is we see the media, we see books, we see movies, we see comics, and sometimes they're not heroes and heroines that reflect folks who look like us, individuals for different communities like the LGBT communities. So we wanted to ensure that they were heroes and even villains who come from these backgrounds and have some diversity, because for every 10 Captain Americas, there's only like one Thunder or lightning. That's the little girl's name. Thunder, but the little one's lightning. Yeah, lightning. Thunder and Lightning from Black Lightning TV show. So and I think about my nieces, and when it comes to superheroes, they got Storm, and that's Storm.
Yeah.
So we created this series, Alpha and Faders, and I hope you enjoy the first book, which is Even the Faders, which is can't hit stores January 1st. And now I'm going to pass it back to Berneta, and she's going to do a couple pages of reading from Even the Faders. So if you like what you hear, click, get the book.
Do your thing.
Do your thing.
So, yeah, and just to build on that, I knew early on writing this book and just generally writing that if I wanted to see representation of folks who look like me, queer women, Black women, so forth and so on, in these spaces like the superhero genre and the comic book genre, I was pretty much going to have to write the stories myself. Because as Lornett said, for every one thunder or lightning or storm, and why are they all weather related? This just hit me. For every one of them, there's 10 more Captain Americas or Iron Man characters. Not to belabor that point, I want to go ahead and move on into a very brief reading of the book. This is from chapter 1, actually. And if you have the book, you can follow along. It starts on page 23. Very quickly, this portion of the story is about where Eve kind of decides to finally take up a meeting with the woman who's given her the mysterious job offer. So she is on her way to the west side of Chicago to meet this woman that she's never heard of about this job that she's been offered. When Eve boarded the Pink Line train that Saturday afternoon, she took a seat next to the door. In the nearly empty train car, one person was standing in the aisle while several others were seated and staring at their phones. A dark-haired woman, laughing and walking alongside a tall woman with a short cropped haircut, entered the train and sat in front of Eve. The women whispered to each other and laughed, an infectious sort of laughter. She thought about Zoe, wondering if she should take her offer to move in. Gabe is nice, but what if he becomes jealous? Sure, he didn't seem like the jealous sort, but you could never be too sure about people, right? Eve watched the women lean in close to one another, kiss lightly on the lips, and continue talking in hushed voices. Her gaze drifted to another pair, a woman and a man who were talking animatedly and shoving and showing one another something on their phones. By the time the train reached her stop, the train car was at capacity. She squeezed through the crowd and exited onto the platform. Repeating the address in her mind, she headed toward the escalator. I could turn back, go home, and forget about this. That's the sensible thing to do. But if there is money in this, an opportunity to save the house. She glanced over her shoulder at the platform below. Oh my God, what am I doing? Oh, fuck it. It's just a meeting. What's the worst that can happen? When she emerged from the station, she stopped at the first storefront window she saw and peered at it, searching for her reflection. She closed her eyes. I need to be unseen, hidden. Yesterday, she lost control and somehow activated her ability. Today, she needed to activate it. I need to be hidden. After a moment, she opened her eyes and saw only the building behind her reflected in the window. Eve looked at the street sign. Following her phone's GPS, she took a right on Pulaski and walked 5 blocks. You have arrived, the GPS announced. She gazed at the boarded up gray building, searching for the number. Where is it? She mumbled, searching. This has to be the right address. She looked around for any sign that she was at the right location. But besides the small shops, one of which appeared to be abandoned, the area was desolate. Just gray stone apartments and cars parked along the street. Sighing, she folded her arms across her chest, just like I figured, waste of fucking time. I hope to change your mind about that, said a familiar voice. Startled, Eve spun around and almost lost her balance. She found herself staring into the dark eyes of a woman who was leaning against a black SUV. I'm glad you made it, Miss Cooper. You can see me? Eve looked at the window of the car and didn't see her reflection. The woman smirked. No, of course not, but I can hear you. How do I know about your particular talent? Well, that's exactly what I like to speak with you about. But if you don't mind, I'd prefer to chat inside since I'm pretty sure it's about to rain. She turned to the car and glanced over her shoulder at Eve. There's a diner a couple minutes away. Is that okay with you? No, I'm sorry. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me how you know. I'm careful to never use my ability. Well, besides when I had the accident yesterday, 4 years ago, we detected some unusual activity in Indiana. So we sent some of our people there and asked questions. Your father, Jackson Cooper, had some interesting things to say. You're lying. My father doesn't know about my ability. Right, he doesn't know. But he did describe a weird incident that happened during your mother's funeral. He believes he must have had one too many drinks because it's the only thing that could explain what he saw. Eve's heart sank. She knew what was next. He claims your mother's invisible spirit not only screamed at him for hurting her, but also drove off in his pickup truck afterward. He said he couldn't see her, but he recognized her voice. Several funeral guests also reported seeing a pickup truck speed off with apparently nobody behind the wheel. It seems they convinced themselves they'd succumb to some sort of mass hysteria due to grief. Any of this ringing a bell to you? Some shadow agency's been watching me for years, spying on me. Making herself visible again, she glared at the woman. Who are you? Agent Olivia Yu, Special Procurement Initiative, Chicago Division. Okay, and why are we meeting at this abandoned building? Oh, this place? It's convenient. I live about 6 blocks south near 24th. She paused and looked at the dark clouds that had moved in while they spoke. So, is a diner okay with you? Eve inhaled, looking from the building to the car to Agent Yu. I may as well find out why these people have been watching me. Fine. And that's one little section from chapter 1 of Eve and the Faders. It gets very interesting from there, trust me. So with that, we're going to move right on into Q&A, just to make sure that we're very cautious about time here. We did have a couple of pre-submitted questions. One was submitted from Howard. I'll go ahead and turn this over to Lornett.
Yeah, so Howard's question is, I'd love to hear about the process of co-authoring and how you generated ideas, and were there ever any conflicting ideas, and how did you resolve them? So I'll let you answer first, Berneta.
So having already written a novel, solo authored, I did not go into the idea of co-writing lightly. Um, it was extremely interesting actually to co-write, primarily because it felt like I was being edited without having an official editor. So that was nice. So being able to write a draft of the story and then share it with my co-author to get his input about this world that I created, and then vice versa with the second book that'll be released soon. Um, Being able to read what Lornett had written and give him feedback. So it felt like we were constantly sort of editing each other, which was really nice because it really allowed me to get not too far into the story, going off track too much without figuring that out early on.
Yeah, and I would say that this is the first time I've ever written something like this, and years ago I would never imagine. But I did have a background where I have a kind of nerd background of being a fan of comic books, and used to read them a lot. And when I was in high school and draw comic book characters, so even the cover is drawn by yours truly or illustrated, as you say in the book world. But I think one of the good things was we were able to bounce ideas off each other, and then whether conflicting ideas, I think one both of our first drafts, we kind of had a story in mind, and then kind of once we combined them, we were thinking about ways to, once you are publishing the book, and this is something I didn't think about. Obviously, as a writer, you're writing something that you want to read, but you also have to make sure that the audience can understand where you're going from or what would happen. So there was lots of tweaks and changes to different characters. Obviously, one of the things that writers happens with both of us is that you really realize you have characters with the same first initial in their name, and you're just like, all these names begin with A, or all these names begin with B or C. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things. So it was really good to like kind of edit each other, bounce ideas off each other, and when there was conflicting ideas, how to make sure that we're not stealing from other things and other platforms and other characters and stuff like that. So we didn't want to do that, but obviously every story is just every new story is just an old story retold. But I think that was one of the interesting parts about it. And then we have another question.
And before you go on to that question, what was really interesting was I don't feel like we actually had too many conflicting ideas, actually. Really, we had sort of ideas that weren't really very fleshed out, and co-authoring kind of enabled us to help each other flesh out our own ideas and make sure that once we fleshed out those ideas, they were consistently represented in the stories. But interestingly enough, I don't think we had any real conflicting ideas. I had a pretty good picture of what Eve, the character, was supposed to look like. And Lornett kind of helped flesh out some of that a little bit. I remember early on, you were like, shouldn't Eve have like, I don't know, like a love interest or something like that? She seemed kind of not at all romantically attached to anybody in the first iteration. And so one thing I made sure that I went back to do was create that kind of layer to her character. I know that with some of the characters that come along later in the sequel, I had my own thoughts like, well, shouldn't this character be like this or that? And we just kind of worked out any kind of questions we had like that. So not really conflicts as much as just ideas to layer the characters and the worlds that we'd already created.
Yeah, so basically a lot of brainstorming.
It was a whole lot of brainstorming. I created a whole new character map actually for the second book. It's all very interesting, but I'm very visual, and I had to do it in order to organize things.
Yeah, and all I would say is like, it's this, when we get to the second story, it's about this world being expanded. So you'll go a deep dive into this, world of Eve of the Faders that's been cloaked in secrecy, and not to give away the plot, but in the second book, it's gonna be even crazier.
Yeah.
And then we got another question, pre-selected question from Stephanie, and her question reads, any specific instructions on how to get published? And I'll turn that over to Berneta.
You're just gonna keep turning it over to me.
You're the expert.
So no, I'm not. So ideas about getting published. So obviously there are different publishing routes a person can take. So there's traditional publishing, whether you do that through a major publishing house or a small publisher, a small press. And then there's the independent self-publishing route. And both have their merits. I think it's very important to try both routes, to be honest. I think it's always worth it to at least pursue an agent to try to get traditionally published, just to see if that's what you actually want. Depending on how much control though you want over your work, how it looks, how the final product really looks. Um, I think independent publishing is really beneficial in that way because you never really relinquish the control over your work. From start to finish is what you want it to end up looking like. Now that doesn't mean, I think some people go into independent publishing, self-publishing, thinking that they don't need to do all the other big stuff that folks do when they publish traditionally, like they don't need to have a editor, proofreader, or anything like this. Um, with self-publishing, with independent publishing, you have to do all of that, and it's all on you to find the individuals who can serve as your editors and proofreaders. And the kind of back and forth you're going to go through with your editor and proofreader is no different than what you would experience in the traditional publishing space. It's just that you maybe will come out of your own pocket to hire an editor. But I have friends who have traditionally published and they still come out of their own pocket to hire their own editor because they trust their own editor sometimes more than the editors at the actual publishing house. So the ways to get published really kind of depend on what you actually want, the kind of control you want, the kind of patience you have, your timeline. If you find waiting maybe several years to see your book end up in print, that's the traditional publishing route. If you kind of want to keep things coming quickly, independent publishing is probably better. And then there are a lot of authors who do both. Some major authors actually have started doing both, independent publishing and traditional publishing. Many of them are creating their own imprints actually to help other small authors, new authors, get published too.
Yeah, and I didn't know much about the publishing world. Just wasn't kind of my thing, so I'm still kind of all new to this space. But I guess one of the things I really like about being able to independently publish is we're not shopping around for a publisher for 2 to 20 years, because in some cases with some authors to get their first book published. So we can just get that right out there, get our story, and also have full control over our story. Obviously, working with the editors and working with each other to make sure that our stories are fleshed out. Berneta is a very experienced writer and author, so she has a great vision, and with me being a novice to this space, is just kind of bringing in kind of outside ideas that aren't traditional. But I think this is I think self-publishing is a good way to just get your stuff out there, get your story out there, and you're not just sitting on it or you're shopping around. And who knows, eventually maybe a publisher will come along and want to work with us to republish this,
or publish something else new that we work on,
or commission us to do another book. But we're not sitting on the story, because I think the first thing you do is just write the story.
Yes,
that's the hardest part.
Yes, it is. That is the hardest. Well, no, I would say the hardest part is revising. The hardest part is revising. To me,
some people just don't start. They're just like, I had this story idea.
That's true.
And I just never write it. It's like, it's a great American novel that's never been written.
Yep, that's true. People have so many stories in their head that they never put to paper or to screen, so to speak. Yeah, that's very true.
So just, if you have an idea, start typing, and the revising part is a D stuff.
Yeah, it is. It takes I don't think so. Whenever anyone asks me how long it takes to write something, I have a very difficult time answering it because there's the writing, the initial draft, which is usually pretty quick for me. But then there's the editing and the revising. And then once I start putting together all the time it took to do all of that, I lose track eventually. And I have a tendency to write an initial draft and put it away for months before I go back to even look at it to try to edit it or revise it. And then after I revise it once, I'll put it down again for months. Mainly because I like to be able to come back to anything I've written with some fresh eyes, so that I'm able to see the errors and things of that nature. So that really concludes the Q&A. If there are no questions in the chat, and I don't see any, I think we can go ahead and wrap up because it is Saturday afternoon. And I know everybody's not in Atlanta, but it's pretty here. Not that I'm going to sit outside because it's cold, but it's very pretty. And I'd like to at least be able to look out my window and enjoy it for the rest of the day, as I'm sure others would like to do too. But thank you for listening and for joining. I will be posting this book launch on my Vimeo and sharing it, so you'll be able to see it even if you didn't attend. Um, I also would just like to remind folks that the book is available in stores everywhere online. The paperback is $16.99 and the ebook is $9.99. Um, I have also created a nice little list of discussion questions that are available on my website at bernetahaynes.com. If you happen to have a reading group and would like to have some discussion questions but don't want to write them yourself, just know that you can find those discussion questions on my website at bernetahaynes.com. I also turned some of them into a little set of bookmarks, which I will probably be giving away at some point. So stay tuned. To keep up to date about everything related to the series, any new short stories that'll be coming from the series, as well as the next book, just keep an eye on bernetahaynes.com. You can even sign up for the monthly newsletter and stay tuned. Thank you very much for joining. Bye.
Bye.